Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My dear students in grade 9, welcome to my channel. Today, inshallah, we will have a new session with chapter 5 from A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. The title of that chapter is A Moment of Terror. Place, England, Dr. Manet's house. Time 4 months after the trail. The introduction, Dr. Manet gasped and his hands flew up to his head. Terror spread across his face for a moment. In that chapter, we will know about the reason of this terror or that moment of terror that spread across his face for a moment. Let's start with the summary. 4 months had passed since Charles Darnay's trial. It was a Sunday afternoon and Jarvis Lorry had come to visit Dr. Manet in his house in London. Mr. Lorry noticed the shoemaker's bench and tools in the doctor's bedroom. He wondered why the doctor still keeps those terrible reminders of his years in prison. Miss Pross isn't pleased with receiving many visitors whom she believed unworthy of her ladybird, Lucy. She was fond of Lucy. She believed that only one man could be worthy of her, her dear brother, Solomon. If only he hadn't made that one mistake in life. What was her brother's mistake? Solomon's mistake was taking all of his sister's belongings years ago and leaving her in poverty. Dr. Manet and Lucy entered the room and they all went out into the garden, and then Charles Darnay arrived. They were talking of old buildings in London when Charles Darnay told them a curious thing about the tower he was imprisoned in before his trial. While some repairs were being made, workmen came across an old cell that hadn't been used for many years. Every stone of its wall was covered with names, dates, and complaints written by the prisoners. While digging under the floor, the workmen found the ashes of a paper. Some unknown prisoner had written a note and hidden it from the jailer. What was written will never be known. When Dr. Manet heard that story, Dr. Manet gasped and put his hands on his head. Terror spread across his face for a moment. Why do you think that when Dr. Manet heard that curious story, he gasped and put his hands over on his head? Because it reminded him of what he was doing while he was in the prison. Okay? Lucy felt worried about her father and asked if he was ill, but the doctor recovered himself quickly, saying, "I just felt some raindrops. We should go inside." But Mr. Lorry had seen that look of terror before. Commentary: Miss Pross was Lucy's nurse and companion. She was devoted to her and always called her my ladybird. She didn't like the visits of Charles Darnay and Sidney Carton to her ladybird and believed that they were unworthy of her. Dr. Manet has completely recovered and restored his memory, and he practices his old profession as a doctor. However, he still kept his shoemaker's bench and tools. This means that his terrible memories and his suffering in the prison didn't easily pass away. The last point, Charles Darnley's story about the hidden message of the prisoner caused Dr. Manette a moment of terror because it reminded him of what he himself had done while he was in prison 18 years before. And we will see later that Dr. Manette wrote some papers and hid these papers in the chimney, and later then we will see that Monsieur and Madame Devarge will discover these papers and will use these papers against Charles Darnley when we come to the second term, inshallah. Let's go to the questions and answers. Well, how was Dr. Manette's new life in London? The answer, he was completely recovered. He lived peacefully in a small house with his beloved daughter and devoted maid. He returned to practicing his old job again. Question number 2, it's a quotation. I was just wondering why the doctor still keeps those things. Comment. Of course, these things he meant the tools of making shoes. Mr. Lorry said this to Miss Pross when he noticed that Dr. Manette still kept the shoe-making tools in his bedroom. These things might always remind him of his miserable life in prison and his old suffering in prison. So Mr. Lorry wanted him to get rid of these terrible tools. Number 3, it's also a quotation. I wouldn't know, but I do know that we are having more visitors today. Another of these young men who are unworthy of my dear Lucy's time. Comment. Miss Pross said this to Mr. Lorry when she was complaining about the visits of Mr. Charles Darnley and Sidney Carton to Lucy. She felt that they weren't worthy of her. Question number 4, who was Solomon? What mistake had he done? Solomon, he was Miss Pross' brother. He had taken all of his sister's belongings years ago and left her in poverty. And we will discover later, my dear students, that Solomon is the one who is called or under a nickname Arthur. What story did Charles Darnley tell them about his prison? When he was in prison, he learned something very curious. Some workers found the ashes of a paper written by some unknown prisoner while they were doing some repairs in a prison cell. The last question, what was the effect of Darnley's story on Dr. Manette's and why? This is the most important question in that chapter, and it could be in different words. Notice that he is my dear students. You have to take care of that. This question could be in different words. Charles Darnley's story about the hidden message of the prisoner caused Dr. Manette a moment of terror because it reminded him of what he himself had done while he was in prison 18 years before. This is the end of chapter 5. I hope that you have got all the information and the details of that chapters. Wish you the best of time. Thank you very much till we meet in chapter 6, inshallah. Thank you very much and goodbye.